We all know what it feels like to be anxious, the nervousness, the worry, the tension, even leading to blood pressure or breathing or heart rate problems. I want to help you rewire your brain so that those symptoms can not only be gone, but you can experience better peace, joy, and success by avoiding anxiety. I'm Dr. Dan Sullivan. I'm a neurostrategist and passionate about the brain. There are a lot of conflicting, confusing ideas when it comes to building business growth and success. I want to help you simplify so that you can turn your dreams into reality. I'm going to teach you how to rewire your brain to avoid anxiety. And hey, if you like content like this, please like and subscribe or ask a question. I'll respond. The first thing we have to realize is that anxiety is real. As blue as the sky is, anxiety is real. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. But being able to rewire your brain to avoid it or to deal with anxiety is absolutely possible. And it's not a game of perfection. As a parent, I alluded to that, like parenting is not about perfection. Neither is rewiring your brain. So I first need to get you to understand that it's real, and being able to overcome it and to avoid it is not about being perfect. And so what I'm gonna go through with you is I'm gonna go through the 4 non-negotiables, 4 key aspects to rewiring your brain to avoid anxiety. So anxiety is not only real, it's a gateway. And what I mean by that is anxiety can lead to so many other things and typically does, even from a health standpoint. So I've dealt with a lot of patients and helped a lot of patients deal with anxiety and the effects of stress, and it literally turns into major health problems. And chronic, meaning long-term problems. It's a downward spiral. So the reason why we want to rewire the brain is so you can take on life with an entire new lens, entire new outlook, an entirely new body. And when you learn how to do this, it does change the game. Whether you're trying to get more success in your business, you're trying to get more success at home, in your finances, in your relationships, in your social life, being able to avoid this thing called anxiety is so critical. But the challenge is real, and it's typically a downward spiral. Once you get caught in it, it literally goes down and down and down. We have seen, if you look at the research, you can name almost any chronic condition, and it's linked directly to stress, which is heightened by anxiety. And so most people, or more people who experience anxiety, are prone to anxiety. So that's why we want to rewire it, and it is possible. But here's, it reminds me of a study. So I studied chronic pain for a long time and helped a lot of patients overcome chronic pain problems. There's this one research that came out, and it showed that when somebody has chronic back pain, they looked at the areas of the brain that were affected. And so they could go to a specific area of the back, and let's say it was low back pain, and they could pinpoint which areas of the brain it affected. And so they knew this area of the back affected this part of the brain and vice versa, right? So then what they did is they followed these subjects that had back pain. And what they found out was fascinating, is that after 3 months of back pain, the areas of the brain that lit up were more than just the physical parts. It actually turned into a mental and emotional component that led to the pain. And this is why dealing with this for so long, that if the part of the brain isn't addressed, then we never solve the physical component. And so it's kind of like phantom limb pain. You can actually find people that had so bad of arm pain that it got so bad that the only recommendation was to cut it off. And what happens is a lot of these people that when they cut off the actual arm, they actually still felt arm pain. So I'm gonna let you kind of think about that for a while. That is a mind boggler. So people had arm pain. They cut the arm off, and they still had arm pain, right? And it turns out it's because this brain is so fascinating. It's called phantom limb pain, meaning the pain is actually felt in the brain. It's not felt in the tissue. The tissue is no longer part of their body, but they still felt it. Why? Because it was part of the brain. So all that to say, this is why it proves that so much of what happens in your brain plays out in your body and then plays out in your life. So I wanna remind you of a video I did that you could find right here, called neuroplasticity and the effects of neuroplasticity. And that simply means, a big long term, that simply means this: you can rewire your brain. The brain is plastic. And so by that, you can change it. And you don't change the physical tissue, you actually change the wiring. You change these synapses with these connections. When you learn a new language or a new skill, you have these new synapses that grow together. And the reason why I start with this when it comes to avoiding anxiety is if you don't believe you can change it, you are correct. You can't. But when you come to grips with you can, you have the capability, and I'll give you the strategies, but you first have to recognize it is possible to avoid anxiety and to rewire your brain so that you can minimize the stress and avoid it altogether. So non-negotiable number one that you're gonna do to start rewiring your brain to avoid anxiety is change and recognize your perspective. Now, some people will call this gratitude. I call it perspective training. And so it reminds me when I went to Haiti, I took my family to Haiti. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the reasons I wanted to give my young girls, a perspective about the world they live in, right? That the world they live in doesn't mean that's the world at large. And so it gave them a new perspective when you go down there and you see naked kids running around because they don't have clothes. When you see, they don't have light so they can't even read a book after dark. When you see they sleep on, mud floors. It quickly puts into a level of gratitude. And so instead of focusing, some people say just do gratitudes, and that's important, but I like to make sure the gratitudes, you're gaining a perspective. It reminds me of another story when I had a disc problem. So about 2 years ago, I herniated a disc, and the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. And there was an 8-week period of time where I could not sleep. So now thinking back, it gives me a perspective of just being able to go throughout my day without sharp shooting blowtorch type pain down my leg. It gives me a level of gratitude. It literally starts to give me a thankfulness, a gratitude, and I'm wired around that. Another one, just recently, I had a friend of mine that found up in an exam that he had, with his neck, there was an enlargement in his neck, and the doc said you should check this out. So he went and got checked out, had ultrasound. There were some concerns there, and he had a biopsy of it. And in the time period from when he found out what it could be, which was about at least 48 to 72 hour period, he told me about it, and even myself, I gained new perspective through his eyes, was thinking about, you look at your kids differently, you look at your wife differently, you look at your life, everything, right? Because what could it be? And thank the Lord that it turned out fine, but what could it be? It immediately, so this tells you immediately that you can make a change and a shift, and this has happened in your life as well. So number one is perspective change. How can you do that? Gratitude's morning and night. People right now in the world are dreaming of what you have right now and the life that you have. And so everything is perspective. So number one is perspective. Non-negotiable number two to rewire your brain to avoid anxiety is movement. Simply movement and posture. The parts of your brain that are linked to actually mental health and emotional health is, well, there's many of them, but one of the key ones is this back part of the brain. It's called the cerebellum. And basically what you need to know is that cerebellum is one that is driven by movement and posture. So if you're sitting in a horrible slumped over posture, head forward, slumped shoulders, right? Not only does it put a tax on your breathing and your spinal cord and your head and your brain, you literally will put yourself in more of an anxious position. That cerebellum, when you get movement in it, simple walks, making sure your posture is okay, making sure your stations and the way you do your work is like posture and movement is so critical to actually having greater mental and emotional health, which is gonna rewire that brain to have things fired, nerves that fire together, wire together. We want them wiring for good health and ultimately good emotional and mental health to avoid anxiety. Non-negotiable number three, what goes in here? Now, if you are gonna wire your brain, your life, and your body to actually create anxiety, if you were gonna say, hey, Dr. Dan, how could I best create anxiety? I would absolutely tell you high amounts of sugar, high amounts of processed food, and high amounts of processed dairy. Those would be the three keys when it comes to a chemical component, is that if you have sugar and processed food, there's no doubt, I could show you, thousands of studies. That's not the point. The point is, how can you eat more foods that are more alive than dead? Less processed, the better. Less sugar, the better. And not only does it affect inflammation, which is a direct anxiety, which is direct, it's going to affect the synapses of the brain. But not only that, when you actually start to eat better, you get a level of confidence that I am an overcomer, that I am disciplined, that I can do this, that I am wired for health, I am wired for happiness, I'm wired for peace and joy. So all that to say, just as much of the chemical component of the food you put in your body, it's also a psychological and mental and neurological component that you are capable to avoid anxiety. And last but not least, the fourth non-negotiable is taking your thoughts captive. This is easier said than done, and maybe many people call this, or it's known to be, meditation. The research is absolutely compelling that when you take your thoughts captive, because the reason why we're inclined to be anxious is because of something, the way that we are programmed, the way something triggers us to think a certain way, to be pessimistic, to be negative, to have fear, anxiety, worry, and that comes from our program. So the key is, if you can take those thoughts captive, you can change it. Now, one simple strategy that I like, yes, meditation is important, but I also, right along with it, by the way, Joe Dispenza, a colleague of mine, would be somebody that you'd want to go look up to. Actually, he has very simple and very effective ways. I mean, the research is, again, so crystal clear that when you can take your thoughts captive, now it's like I said, it's not easy, but here's one thing that I do. I think about, what would future Dan do? What would happy Dan do? In this scenario, what would generous Dan do? What would successful Dan do? You literally can rewire your brain to take those thoughts captive of the old you and to become the new you. Oh, and one more thing, here's a bonus for you. Listen up, listen to this one. If you were gonna program your brain for more anxiety, compare your life to everyone else's highlight reel. Well, how would you do that, right? Spend a ton of time on social media. Control that time. And one of the other things too that I found recently, and many people have talked about this, Stephen Covey did in his book, and Donald Miller did in his book, so he talks about actually getting on purpose. One of the best ways to get on purpose is to write out your eulogy. It sounds a little bit grotesque, but when you write out your eulogy, it actually helps you be aligned with your purpose, because that's who you want to become. You get to create that now. If you took the time to create that now, that's who you want to become. A lot of times we try to compare ourselves to everybody else versus this is who we really want. When you do that, you attach yourself to purpose and literally help to avoid the programming of anxiety. So there you have it. These are non-negotiables, and I get so fired up because your success, your growth, and everything you want is inside you. And that's the drum I'll keep banging. And you know, it's all about inside out, right? Healing is inside out, success is inside out, fulfillment's inside out. Any emotion you're looking to try to acquire is an inside out game. When you believe it, everything changes, because then you actually take the action to do it. Listen, if you like content like this, as much as I like making it, you should subscribe. You'll get more of it. There's plenty more of that came from. Start now. We'll see you on the next one. God bless.